Hello, welcome to our Colours of Life show today. We're in a special occasion because it's a special edition. And I'm talking to 87-year-old David Carlin, medical doctor and missionary. He's also director with Global Commission Partners Europe. So David, welcome to our show.
Thank you, it's nice to be here.
It's lovely to have you here. Well, we're going to be talking to you about I'll be asking you why you love Nigeria, because I know you have strong ties with Nigeria. I'd like to know what has brought you to Nigeria on this occasion. And of course, we'd like to glean some lessons from you, from your over 70 years of walking with God.
Where would you like me to start?
From the beginning, maybe. You are a medical doctor.
Yes.
And yet you left the medical profession to become a missionary. I mean, you know, a doctor is a very respected professional, and that line of profession would get you a good income and a comfortable lifestyle anywhere in the world, particularly in your home of England. So why did you set that aside to go into the mission field?
Well, actually, it was the other way around. I took up medicine to follow the missionary call, because that missionary call came when I was 14 years old, and it was to recognize that I had to live no longer for myself, but for him who died for me and rose again, that I had to die to self and live for God. So that was at the early age of 14, and I asked what would be a good way of serving God.
And what prompted you to ask this question? Were you listening to someone? Or?
Yes, it was the person that was preaching from 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 14. The love of Christ controls us, constrains us, that if we recognize that we're no longer living, but we're living for Christ. So that he was a missionary from China. And he illustrated what he had to say from the great river Yangtze in China, which he said that word to constrain, the love of Christ constrains, it's to shut us in, like that river was shut in by the rocky walls. And it gained direction, because once the river gets down onto the plains, it just meanders from side to side. So direction was the first thing. I was a young man, I was wanting direction. The second thing he said was it gains tremendous drive, impetus, as it comes rushing down the gorges. And I wanted that too as a young man. But the third thing was the depth. As the tributaries are added to that river, and it's constrained, it's held in, it's shut in, it can only increase in depth. And so that is something I had to learn as life went on. I didn't really understand it at that time.
So can we call that that moment when you heard that message a defining moment
Absolutely.
In your life?
It defined my life completely, and
Okay.
and I followed that. And so I asked the question, how best could I offer my life to God? And the advice I received was, well, what about being a medical doctor? So I took up the medicine at that point, and 10 years later, having qualified and got married, then we came to Nigeria in 1958.
Was that the first time you were leaving your home country?
Yes.
And you arrived in Nigeria?
Yes.
And where did you work in Nigeria?
Well, we arrived in Lagos on the boat. Remember, we came by boat.
Okay.
13 days and nights on the sea is a long time, and it makes you realize just how far Nigeria is from UK. Today you can go in 6 hours. Then it was 13 days and 13 nights without stopping. Came to Lagos, and there was a letter brought on board the boat saying we were posted to Maiduguri in Borno province. So we got the train from Lagos up to Jos, 2.5 days on the train, and then after the weekend in Jos in our headquarters, by road up to Maiduguri, another 12 hours journey by road, into the province of Borno, which was solidly Muslim.
And I know your medical background, you know, God used that background to open an unusual door for you to serve amongst the people in Borno. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, at first we were based in a leprosy hospital, a leprosy institution, because in those days, leprosy patients were shut out from society. And so that was the base, and we were serving leprosy patients all the way through our time in Nigeria. But using that as a base, we also integrated general medicine into the leprosy work, and that formed the basis of an opening into the Lake Chad basin, the Lake Chad area. To the north of us from Maiduguri, there was just a blank area on the map. It was impossible, just camel tracks, no roads. So when we got a four-wheel drive vehicle, we were able to move into that territory, and we've just kept on moving on and on till we discovered Lake Chad, this huge, huge inland sea, and establishing with training Nigerian evangelists medically. I trained them medically at our base hospital, and then they were posted out by the Lord 2 by 2 into these dispensaries, and that's how the work of the Lake Chad Basin developed. Nigeria has its part in the lake, and it was a very, very big lake in those days. It shrunk in the present days, and it was shared by Chad, the largest portion, by Cameroon, and by Niger.
So you were basically reaching out to people not just in Nigeria, but in the Chad and the Cameroon area as well.
Yes.
And tell us about Al-Bashir?
Al-Bashir, yes.
Al-Bashir, the boat.
Yes. We didn't have a boat at first. Then we got a river boat from the Benue, and that was hopeless on a sea. And eventually we had this boat built in Epe, near Lagos.
Okay,
and I transported it, towed it behind the Land Rover, which was in itself an epic, with police escort all the way through.
Okay.
It took us, I think now how many days? It took us, I think, about 9 days, I think, to get up to Maiduguri. And then the launching of that boat was another huge effort. And that boat began to open up the work in these 4 nations, because there was no medical help in any of those nations in those areas. None. No other medical help. And of course, the gospel. There was no entrance of the gospel. So the two went together, the medical and the gospel. And it was based on Nigerian missionaries. In the first instance, Nigerian missionaries. In the second, added to that, Chadian missionaries.
Okay.
And so the whole African team was concerned to reach out with the love of Jesus to people who are Muslims who had never heard and had no medical help.
I know the BBC did a documentary on your work, which we'd look at during the break, and then we'll come back and talk about the, I mean, it wasn't very easy, as we can imagine, doing this work at that time. We'd like to know about the situation with electricity, water, and I know you did suffer some personal loss. We're going to go on a break now, and when we come back, we'll watch a documentary by the BBC that covers Dr. Carlin and Mrs. Carlin's work in the 50s and 60s in Nigeria. Stay with us.
Wales is about moat as you can get, live around its shores and on its islands. And many of its islands float, rafts of papyrus grass on which people live and fish. Here, if you're sick, you get better eventually, or you die. You don't expect to see a doctor. But there is a doctor, one doctor, a missionary, David Carlin, an Englishman who's begun to bring medicine and Christianity to the Muslim Budama people on the floating islands, who knows the area as well as any white man. By any criterion, this is worthy, even noble work. He's not the only doctor working under these conditions. His mission, the Sudan United Mission, alone has 25 doctors in the field. But it hardly seems the most economic use of limited medical resources. Carlin agrees. Were it simply a question of doing the greatest medical good to the greatest number, he would not spend days cruising around this huge lake just to serve a few people on a floating island. But he's also an evangelist. He and his dispensers are also missionaries. They also come to preach.
This is a call of God that I have felt since I was about 14 years old.
For the lepers, he is a special concern, operating on their twisted limbs when possible, easing their pain when it's too late for treatment.
Severe infiltration throughout limbs, non-tender.
And given that he's come to you at this age, you can stop it at this point?
Yes, I would say that after some years of treatment, at least 7 to 10 years, this child could well be negative and symptom-free.
While one must admire Carlin's work and admire it greatly, one can also see its limitations. This is not to belittle his efforts, but to describe them. For Carlin is first and foremost an evangelist, anxious to offer the word of God to the largest possible number of people. To this end, he scattered his resources, himself travels over an area many hundreds of miles square every month. This is a classic pattern for missionary medicine. For these people it reaches, it brings relief, it reduces the pain and the suffering.
Thank you for staying with us. I'm talking to David Carlin, who came to Nigeria in 1958 with his wife Gwyneth, and they worked as missionaries for 18 years. We've just seen an amazing documentary covering some of that work. And now we'll continue our conversation. Dr. Carlin, we thank God for that documentary, but I have a question. Have you thought of writing a book?
Yes, I have. Several people urged me to do so, and when I had the opportunity, when my wife was looking after her parents before they died, I took the opportunity of beginning to put some of these remembrances and recollections down. And over that period, and then the advice was that we should write it together. So my wife Gwyneth and I have written together and tried to unfold some of the things that we went through.
So we should expect a book?
It would be very nice if someone would pick it up and publish it, yes.
Do you have a title for it?
We're calling it Striding Edge.
Okay, interesting, Striding Edge.
Always taking strides for God and always living on the edge rather than just sitting down and being satisfied.
Comfortable land. Okay. No, I'd like to take you back to the late 50s, early 60s, and the time of your work in Nigeria, particularly the first few years. We'd like to know the conditions, the living conditions then.
It was very different from what it would be, I guess, today, but even in those days we had no electricity. The water was from a well in the compound, and leprosy patients would come and using the leather skins which they themselves created and were selling, get the water for us. So life was pretty basic. But even then we were still far, far above the level of the local people who were they were leprosy patients. They were all leprosy patients, and they were all needing care, which we sought to give.
And I know that in many societies, lepers are like outcasts. So was that the case there?
Yes, indeed. They were in a settlement 6 miles removed from the main city of Maiduguri. And so what we longed to do was to integrate them into society. So not just treating leprosy patients, but we began to treat other patients alongside, general medical patients, and integrate the two. And that created the opening, the integration between leprosy and medicine, general medicine. It created the opening into the Lake Chad Basin, where there was no medical treatment available at all.
And the gospel, of course.
And the gospel went along with it, yes.
Yeah. And tell us about the personal loss yourself and your wife.
Yes. Before we came to Nigeria, we'd had our first disappointment. Our first child, our only daughter as far as we know, was stillborn, and that was a great shock. But then 2 years later we came out to Nigeria with high expectations that we would be able to have a family, and Gwyneth became pregnant again, and in this little place, Molly in Maiduguri, and there were no other doctors except one doctor in Maiduguri city, and she began horrendously hemorrhage and collapsed on the floor, and I put her on the bed, and there was no pulse, and I couldn't read her blood pressure. I thought she'd dead. And I had no blood transfusion, I had no facilities. We were just beginning to establish a small guest house, little whitewashed room as an operating room. So I gave my wife Gwyneth an injection to try and stem the hemorrhage, and jumped into my kit car and dashed into Maiduguri to raise the only other doctor. Dashed back thinking I'd find her dead, but she'd revived. And when this Indian surgeon came in, and I said to him, I said, will you do the operation, or will you give the anesthetic? And he looked at me and he said, I think I'll do the operation. So when I was drawing up the syringe to put her to sleep, my own wife, you know, and begin to inject it into her arm, my hand was shaking. And the surgeon said to me, "You see what I mean?" And then followed this terrible, terrible hydrotidiform mole. It wasn't a baby, it was just awful. But Gwyneth survived that, and for 2 years we had to wait while the investigations were following in case it would develop into cancer. It didn't, and we then tried again. And then with our next pregnancy, it all went well, and I was looking after her, of course, as the only doctor. We came to Vom Hospital on the plateau for the delivery. All went well, and 2 days later the child died. And so our son was buried in Nigeria.
And I know that must have been very difficult because I know doctors restrain from treating close family members, so I can imagine how that experience was for you. She survived and you continued the work. Is she a nurse?
No, she's a teacher.
Okay, but she was helping
she
you.
did a lot. I trained her in lots of medicine. She gave her anesthetics, and the next time we had a miscarriage, I had to both give the anesthetic and do the operation because there was no other doctor then available. And Gwyneth by that time was much better than I was at giving anesthesia. So when she was going to sleep, she was telling me how to do it. But yes.
Amazing.
Yes, yes.
In your, I know, you know, your book, we hope to read your book, Striding Edge, soon, and there would be, you know, so much in that book. But I'd like to ask you, is there an experience that you'd like to share with us, perhaps in all those years, something that we could call a miracle that God did for you?
There was one, and it wasn't just called a miracle, it was a miracle actually of being rescued. You know, Lake Chad was a huge sea, and it was a turbulent sea, and we were visiting with our little dinghy. We were visiting one of the African missionaries' stations on the shores of the lake, coming back in the early hours of the morning, dressed, because it was cold at that time of year, dressed in Wellington boots and sweater, and the dinghy overturned in the turbulent waters. And we had two of the Nigerian missionaries who were not able to swim. I was holding one on top of this boat, and the waves were trying to sweep him off, and he was screaming in terror. The other one was just going down and drowning, and he clutched hold of me and as a drowning man, and I was a trained lifesaver, so I got rid of him in the approved manner. And I saw at the same time, I saw my senior missionary director who was visiting from UK going down for the third time. So the thing was desperate. And at that point, at that moment, the bigger boat, the Al Bishir, had been seeing our difficulties, were following us into the stormy waters. And at that moment, the amphibian Missionary Aviation Fellowship plane appeared on the scene. And I need to tell you about why that was so miraculous, because he would leave in Jamina in Chad to clear customs in Nigeria, in Maiduguri, and my wife would go and serve him coffee and so on and chat. He said, "Oh no, I don't think, I just feel pressed to get on." And he didn't stay for coffee. And so when he came to the point where we should have been, the rendezvous where he should have found us, we weren't there. So he came on to the previous dispensary, just 5 minutes in the plane, and he saw what was happening. And as he landed on this stormy water, he should not have done so, but he landed on this stormy water at the precise moment that the other boat came alongside us, and our colleague, our strong young man, lifted Mr. Tet up by the scruff of his neck and onto the boat, and another of the Nigerian missionary was put onto the boat, and several onto the floats of the amphibian plane. And then finally the pilot, John, said to me, "David," he said, "I think I need to get you on board," because I was all in. So we were all saved by the grace of God.
Wow, so God still works miracles.
Yes, he does.
We've been talking to David Carlin. We'll take a break now, and when we come back, we'll ask him about the church in the United Kingdom, the church in Nigeria, and how we can work together. We'll also like to know what he's been doing since he left Nigeria, and we'll talk to him about family life and glean some lessons before we let him go.
Colors of life.
Welcome back to our Colors of Life show. My guest today is Dr. David Carlin. He's a director with the Global Commission Partners in Europe. So we have a few minutes left with him. So fast forward some 60 years since you came to Nigeria. You're here now on a visit. So what brings you to Nigeria this time?
I've come as the guest of Christian Association of Nigeria.
Okay.
2 years ago I came when Khan had a big meeting with all the church leaders in Abuja, and it just didn't seem to produce anything. But now they've persisted, and they're calling together again the Christian leaders, and we're hoping to meet them here in Lagos, but also the monarchs, the Christian tribal leaders of the Middle Belt in Abuja. So
And what are you hoping to achieve?
we're hoping that this will enable the churches to speak with one voice, to unite, to come together, and together with the tribal chiefs, and to stand and just say, as Christian people, we're raising the need of our nation.
So important for the church to speak with one voice, unity, because we know that God promises a blessing where there is unity.
Yeah, indeed.
What's your daily routine at 87? And I know your wife is also about the same age. So
She's
how do
sick.
you spend your day?
She's 6 weeks old and I can never catch her up. But, well, yeah, we've slowed down. We haven't had to slow down, but we're still very much involved. Together we've been teaching, and we're hoping and looking forward to going back to Georgia, Tbilisi in Georgia, to teach again, yet one final session, I think, 1 more week's teaching. Coming out to Nigeria just now, and we're involved together in reaching out in an estate in Lancaster to try and bring the good news of Jesus and the love of Jesus to people who are very, really needy. So that's what we've been doing, and that's what we continue to do, God willing, giving us the strength.
And how can we best, as the church in Nigeria, for instance, influence society? Do you have any thoughts on that? Anything to leave with us?
I think we need to, just as I said right at the beginning, when I was 14, we're to live not for ourselves, but for Christ who died for us and rose again. If we're really living to glorify Jesus, then people will see there's a difference. And that needs to be seen in our lives, doesn't it? There's so much corruption, there's so much distraction, there's so much selfishness, there's so much seeking of power, influence. If we are living for Christ, then we live simply, but in love will reach out to those around us.
At almost 87, you'll be 87 in like 2 weeks. What do you know for sure?
I know where I'm going, and I know that we're looking forward for new heavens and a new earth wherein dwells righteousness. And I'm also very encouraged to read in Paul's letter to the Corinthians that our labor in the Lord is not in vain. I believe that what has been attempted in his name, all that's good and right from this present world, evil though it is, will be brought over into the new heavens and the new earth, and we will see the kings of the earth and the people of every nation, tribe and tongue around the throne of the Lamb.
Are you thinking of retiring anytime soon?
I hope not. I really want to serve the Lord as long as he gives me strength.
And I know you speak fluent Hausa.
Yeah, I speak. I used to preach fluently in Hausa.
Okay.
It's getting a bit rusty now, but yes, I do speak Hausa. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to say something in Hausa. Briefly, it was a blessing, a word, a message. I won't be able to understand you, but I'm sure there are millions out there who would understand.
Allah ya ikamnar dunya har ya badat ansa haifa fe shikadai dan kada kowane yalalache amaya sami reina har abada. That's John 3:16.
And what is John 3:16? For
God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life.
Thank you so much, Dr. David Carlin. It's been an honor to have you on this program and to speak to you. Thank you.
It's been a joy.
This is where we draw the curtain on this special, very special edition of our Colors of Life program, speaking to Dr. David Carlin, missionary medical doctor and a Nigerian son at heart. Thank you for being with us. Don't forget to follow us on social media and keep a date with us same time next week. Thank you.